The world is watching Gaza, where the crossroads of history and tragedy intersect once again. As high-level United States officials and Israeli envoys gather in Washington for yet another round of urgent diplomacy, the landscape of Gaza reverberates with some of the heaviest bombardments in recent memory. For the people of Gaza, the headlines promising a ceasefire sound like distant thunder, drowned out by the constant roar of explosions, the cries of the displaced, and the palpable fear that grips the streets. The world asks, is this the long-awaited moment when peace finally emerges, or are we witnessing the grim repetition of history, this time with even more catastrophic consequences? To truly understand today's crisis, we must journey back through more than a century of conflict, hopes, and heartbreak. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the world's most protracted struggles, rooted in overlapping national dreams and bitterly contested land. The story's pivotal chapter began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as waves of Jewish and Arab nationalism converged in the land then known as Palestine. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947 sought to split the territory into separate Arab and Jewish states. Instead, it ignited the First Arab-Israeli War, leading to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, an event Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe. The borders shifted again in June of 1967, during the Six-Day War, when Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and other territories. These seismic events set the stage for decades of failed peace processes, recurring violence, and deepening mistrust. Each attempt at diplomacy, from the Oslo Accords in the 1990s to the Annapolis Conference in the early 2000s, has ultimately faltered, leaving both Israelis and Palestinians scarred by loss and disappointment. Unemployment has soared, at times reaching nearly 50% of the adult population, with youth unemployment even higher. More than 80% of Gaza's residents rely on humanitarian assistance for basic survival. Power outages are a daily reality, sometimes lasting up to 20 hours per day. Hospitals struggle to maintain critical services, while schools operate in overcrowded and under-resourced conditions. For Gaza's more than 1 million children, life is defined by scarcity, uncertainty, and the ever-present threat of violence. The blockade has contributed to widespread poverty. Over half the population lives beneath the poverty line. Food insecurity is rampant, with United Nations agencies repeatedly warning of famine conditions, particularly for children and pregnant women. Clean water is scarce. Over 90% of water sources are unfit for human consumption. The psychological impact is staggering. According to mental health experts, over half of Gaza's children show signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, or anxiety, making the territory one of the world's epicenters of trauma-related illnesses. Fast forward to the autumn of 2023, when the conflict escalated to unprecedented levels. On October 7th, Hamas fighters launched a surprise attack into southern Israel, killing over 1,000 civilians and taking more than 200 hostages, including women, children, and elderly people. It was the deadliest single day in Israel's modern history. The Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, responded with overwhelming military force. Airstrikes, artillery barrages, and ground incursions swept across Gaza. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, since that day, more than 56,000 Palestinians have been killed, the vast majority of them civilians. Women and children make up a disproportionate share of the casualties. The devastation has left nearly every resident, over 2 million people, displaced at least once, with many forced to flee multiple times as front lines shift and new evacuation orders are issued. The United Nations now estimates that more than 80% of Gaza's territory is either directly militarized by Israeli forces or under active evacuation orders, making it nearly impossible for civilians to find shelter or safety. In the words of Salah, a 60-year-old father of 5 from Gaza City, "Explosions never stopped. They bombed schools and homes. It felt like earthquakes." Salah's testimony, echoed by countless others, offers a window into the daily terror that grips ordinary families. June 30th, 2025 brought yet another grim milestone. On that single day, Israeli airstrikes and artillery killed at least 60 civilians, targeting areas in northern and eastern Gaza. Israeli tanks rumbled into the Zaytun suburbs of Gaza City, while aircraft bombed at least 4 schools that had been serving as makeshift shelters for hundreds of displaced families. Eyewitnesses told of relentless barrages, with rescue crews struggling to reach survivors amid the rubble. Mahmoud Basal, the spokesperson for Gaza's civil defense, reported that dozens of people died near aid distribution points due to ongoing attacks and the chaos that has engulfed the region. The humanitarian crisis is spiraling with each passing day. Hunger stalks the population. The United Nations has warned that Gaza is on the brink of famine, with food stocks exhausted and malnutrition rates climbing. Since May, more than 500 Palestinians have been killed just while trying to reach humanitarian aid convoys. Hospitals, already battered by months of conflict, are now facing critical shortages of medicine, fuel, and even basic supplies like bandages and clean water. Power outages are frequent, putting the lives of thousands of patients, including newborns in incubators and those requiring dialysis, at grave risk. The World Health Organization has described the situation as a catastrophe for public health. The United States-backed aid delivery system, meant to alleviate suffering, is itself under fire. The United Nations has described the system as killing people rather than saving them, due to the chaos and danger surrounding aid distribution points. Civilian deaths near these points have become alarmingly common, as desperate families risk their lives to secure a few bags of flour or bottles of water. The international community is sounding the alarm. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, citing clear evidence of violations of international humanitarian law. He warns that the current trajectory is simply unacceptable. Yet even as the bombs fall and hunger spreads, diplomatic maneuvering intensifies. Israeli Minister Ron Dermer has arrived in Washington, reportedly to discuss the terms of a possible ceasefire, the return of hostages, and broader regional security issues, including the rising tensions with Iran. Mediators from Qatar and Egypt, who have played crucial roles in previous ceasefire deals, are working around the clock to broker talks, but as of now, no new round of negotiations has been scheduled. The two sides remain deeply entrenched. Israel insists that the war will end only when Hamas is fully disarmed and dismantled, while Hamas demands a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and guarantees for reconstruction and political rights. Meanwhile, the war's political and legal dimensions are growing more complex. The United Kingdom's High Court recently ruled that the sale of parts for F-35 fighter jets to Israel is lawful, despite widespread international concern over potential breaches of humanitarian law. Human rights organizations, including ActionAid UK, have expressed profound disappointment, warning that continued arms sales risk fueling further atrocities. The legal and ethical debates over accountability and proportionality in warfare are intensifying, with the International Criminal Court and United Nations agencies investigating possible war crimes on all sides. For ordinary people, daily life has become a battle for survival. Families are separated by shifting front lines and destroyed communications networks. Parents struggle to comfort children who wake in terror each night, haunted by the sounds of shelling and the loss of friends and relatives. Schools have been transformed into shelters, but even these are not safe. Dozens have been bombed or evacuated under threat of attack. One teacher described the atmosphere. "We try to teach children about hope, but every day we lose more of it ourselves." The psychological wounds may prove to be the most enduring legacy of this conflict. Experts warn that the trauma experienced by Gaza's children is both acute and generational. Without massive intervention, the territory faces an epidemic of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety, conditions that can ripple through families and communities for decades. The United Nations Children's Fund estimates that more than 700,000 children in Gaza are in urgent need of mental health support. These invisible scars threaten to undermine any future peace as trauma and resentment become part of the social fabric. As the world watches events unfold, the risks of escalation are growing. The possibility of a broader regional conflict looms large. If outside actors such as Iran or Hezbollah are drawn into the war, particularly as tensions between Iran and the United States simmer, what is now a localized conflict could explode into a full-scale Middle Eastern war. The consequences would be catastrophic. Millions more displaced, regional economies in ruins, and global energy markets destabilized. In the words of Marwan Bashara, a senior analyst at Al Jazeera, Israeli leaders are prolonging the war in Gaza despite having multiple opportunities to end it. His warning echoes the fears of many experts who see the current crisis as a powder keg that could ignite a much larger conflagration. At the heart of this complex tragedy are several possible futures, each carrying profound consequences for millions of lives. Let's explore the scenarios that could shape the months and years ahead. But history counsels caution. Previous ceasefires have often proven fragile, brief pauses before a new cycle of violence. Since the start of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there have been at least 15 major rounds of fighting in Gaza alone, each one leaving deeper scars and more entrenched grievances. Unless the fundamental drivers of conflict, territorial disputes, security fears, and the denial of basic rights, are addressed, any truce is likely to offer only temporary respite. The risk is that the world will witness a 16th, 17th, or 18th flare-up, perpetuating an endless cycle of bloodshed and despair. A darker scenario is the expansion of the conflict beyond Gaza's borders. If regional players such as Iran, Hezbollah, or even Syria become directly involved, the consequences could be catastrophic. The Middle East is already a region fraught with rivalries and unresolved tensions. The United States and Iran, for instance, have come close to direct confrontation in recent years, and any miscalculation could draw in other states, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and even Russia. A wider war would not only devastate the immediate region, but would also have ripple effects on global stability, trade, and security. The specter of a regional conflagration is a nightmare scenario that keeps diplomats awake at night. But there is another, often overlooked crisis unfolding: the mental health emergency in Gaza. Beyond the physical destruction, the psychological toll may be the gravest legacy of this war. Mental health professionals warn that entire generations are at risk of growing up with deep psychological scars, affecting their ability to learn, work, and participate in society. The need for trauma counseling, community healing, and long-term support is immense, and yet resources are woefully inadequate. Without massive international investment in mental health, Gaza's children may inherit not just the ruins of war, but a legacy of fear, mistrust, and anxiety that shapes their entire lives. So, what practical lessons can we draw from this ongoing crisis? Understanding the dynamics at play is critical, not just for policymakers and diplomats, but for citizens around the globe. The Gaza conflict is a stark reminder that international diplomacy is only as effective as the willingness to address root causes, not just symptoms. Military power alone cannot bring lasting peace. Solutions must be built on a foundation of dignity, safety, and hope for the future. Food, education, and security are as vital to stability as ceasefire agreements or military disengagements. For viewers and concerned citizens, staying informed and engaged is the first step. When you read headlines about violence or see images of aid trucks stopped at border crossings, remember the human stories behind the statistics. Every number represents a life, a family torn apart, a child's future imperiled, a community struggling to endure. Use your voice to urge your governments to support meaningful peace initiatives and robust humanitarian aid, not just empty rhetoric or symbolic gestures. Share credible information, challenge misinformation, and foster conversations that emphasize empathy and understanding rather than division. There are also broader implications for global economics and technology. Conflict zones like Gaza are a stark reminder that economic development and technological progress cannot take root where violence and trauma go unaddressed. The instability in Gaza reverberates far beyond its borders, affecting regional economies, disrupting trade routes, and undermining global efforts to promote innovation and growth. Peace is not just a moral imperative, it is an economic necessity. The well-being of the global community, including your own economic prospects, is inextricably linked to peace and stability in regions like the Middle East. As the world waits for the outcome of the latest diplomatic efforts in Washington, the fate of millions hangs in the balance. Will this be the moment when determined diplomacy finally breaks the tragic stalemate? Or will Gaza remain trapped in a cycle of destruction, displacement, and despair? The honest answer is that there is hope, but no guarantees. Since the late 20th century, the world has witnessed at least 15 major escalations in Gaza, each one more devastating than the last. Over 56,000 Palestinians and more than 1,700 Israelis have lost their lives since October of 2023 alone. Every day without a sustainable solution deepens the suffering and sows the seeds for future instability. In closing, if you have found this analysis thought-provoking or informative, please share this video and add your perspective in the comments below. What do you believe it will take to achieve lasting peace in Gaza? What role should the international community play? Subscribe for more in-depth explorations of global economics, technology, and the challenges that shape our world. Your voice and your choices matter more than you may realize. Together, we can demand a future defined not by conflict,